All right. Well, Rob, I want to thank you again for joining. Appreciate your corporate membership with CSA and look forward to your discussion today. So without further ado, I'll let you go ahead and take the reins here.
All right, great. Can you hear me okay? I got the
Yep.
headset on today, and I kept my camera on because the team told me I needed to keep my camera on. So, chatting with you guys from the lovely Vail Valley here in Colorado. So, if there's any skiers, we got our first foot of snow last week, and it's really cold. So, if you're planning to come out west and brave whatever you need to brave to come out, it's like a promised ski season behind us. But anyways, I'm Rob Egerbrecht. I'm one of the founders here at Cloudrise, and today we're going to walk you through a case study. I like to keep things super interactive. This will not be salesy. The idea is to just do a lot of knowledge share here with the time that we have allocated. I know you guys, everybody's stuck in Zoom and webinars. So again, I'm going to try to keep this as interactive as possible. If you guys have questions as I move along, don't wait until the end. Just pop in and go, hey, why'd you do that way? Or what were you thinking about when you did it? And this is a real world case study. So we actually started this project and it was transitioning an organization from a lot of on-premise security to essentially a lot of cloud security. And that was data loss prevention, a web proxy gateway, an existing CASB that they really weren't getting a lot of value out of. I'm not going to use manufacturers' names. I'll try to keep this independent. What really I want you guys to focus on is some of the things that they experienced. This was done within 120 days, so it was really impressive, all done remotely. And if you guys have ever, encountered an on-prem web proxy, it's been in place for 10, 15, in some cases 20 years, and then an on-prem DLP solution that's been vastly embedded inside an organization. And to transition that, the organization is very cloud first. And so they had rapidly adopted to Azure, O365, Salesforce, Workday. It was really impressive how the CIO was so cloud first, but the CISO and the security team really had to pivot. And so as you can see here, 4,500 employees. It's a Fortune 500 company. They're fast moving, and they're in the insurance space. So that U.S. healthcare plan provider, they're more on the payer side than the provider side. But it was really interesting. So I thought we would share the experience with you, and hopefully some of this will resonate. It's very data protection focused. That's really our kind of sweet spot. A little background on me. I think it's always important to get an idea of if someone's presenting, why they probably bring hopefully some wisdom and some relevance. So I've spent my whole career I started in international telecommunications and networking. I've expatted around the world in Japan, Copenhagen, and London. And I've worked in big organizations, Fortune 500s. And then as my career progressed out of networking, it became into cybersecurity about 20 years ago. In the area in cyber, I always break cyber up into kind of four pillars. And that is where I kind of got started in the perimeter and SOC and SIM. And then we kind of evolved there into the whole threat management, intrusion detection, then into malware. And the latest wave, it seems, is this identity and access management. I've always been in the data protection space. So when the first DLP providers came out in 2002, 2003, we kind of built a company around those providers on managing those solutions called BEW Global. That turned into IntelliSecure about in 2015, 2016. We sold that to a private equity firm and spent about 2 years there. And then we had a different vision. I spent then about 28 months leading Deloitte's data risk team in the United States. And I also had some international responsibilities. What I found out there really quickly is I'm not a big four guy. I'm a seasoned entrepreneur, and I'm a big wild idea guy. So we started Cloudrise last fall. I always joke that nothing like doing a startup in the middle of a global pandemic, but it's been actually a lot of fun. The challenges that have arisen kind of validated our model. Our idea was to build an organization that had a service delivery that was remote based. We never wanted to have big facilities. We wanted to challenge that model. So the world definitely gave us that challenge right out of the gate. So that's a little bit of my background. At Deloitte, what was interesting is we couldn't work on traditional data loss prevention tools in that market because of non-competes. So I led up the cloud security practice there, and we worked with a lot of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, learning their native capabilities around security. And then what was really cool is we got to play with all of the leading CASB/SASE manufacturers, bring them into the lab, test them, deploy them in environments. So the Netscopes, the SkyHighs, BitGlass, Zscaler, Palos play in that market. So that's where my expertise is going to come from, is really playing around with those tools, seeing how they work in environments, and then we're going to talk about this this use case. So any questions before I get started? Hopefully everybody's got some lunch, maybe some coffee. So we'll get going here. The perfect storm. So these guys, what had happened is they were going to transition off 3 platforms. And I wouldn't recommend this, but they went for it. And so they said, we're going to rip out a web proxy that's been here for 15 years. A DLP solution had been there for about 10 years, and a CASB solution that just frankly, like a lot of CASB solutions when they first came out, was used for shadow IT. They had it connected to APIs. They could kind of see some of the data moving in and out, but frankly, there was no proactive action taking place. They weren't trying to block anything being moved around up into the cloud. And they didn't really have any of the agents or those inline capabilities a lot of the SASE solutions have now. And so it was really hard to justify the spend. And so what they said is, hey, we're going to buy in all on this one manufacturer's platform, and they're going to replace all the capabilities. What they found is there was some of the on-prem DLP capabilities that they just couldn't replace, so they ended up keeping the on-prem DLP endpoint, but removing the network components. When they started doing this, this was at the beginning of March, and the world was starting to change rapidly, and then their resource left that they had assigned to it. So they didn't have resources. And I think this is one of the biggest problems just in cyber, as we all know, is how do you staff around this? How do you continually keep the right people in play? And this really bit them, and they were highly relying on this person. And then the technology that they had, frankly, they had outgrown it. So most of the things they had moved up into the cloud, the current proxy technology wasn't giving them visibility, wasn't really architected for. And then, as I said, the accelerated timeline, what happened is they had renewals coming up that they didn't want to spend money on with the existing manufacturers, as well as now the world had completely changed by the time this project happened and everyone went remote. So now what they were having to do is essentially figure out, how do we operate in this? So this is what was presented to our team. So they engaged us and said, work with it. We trust the manufacturer, but they don't have all this experience with data protection and understanding how these tools work from an on-prem perspective. How can we get you guys engaged to help us assess, plan, deploy it? And then another thing that you're going to hear me harp upon inside, well, hopefully harp is not the right term, but expand upon is the concept of automation. And I'm just going to take a break here and talk about that for a second, because I am going to speak to it this entire presentation. And the reason why I am is throwing bodies at problems in trying to get price arbitrage with cheaper resources offshore. I am finding with so many clients right now that have offshored resources that they are seeing that in a world where a pandemic or in who knows what else could demand a remote workforce, that frankly, a distributed work environment in some of these offshore centers, such as the Philippines, India, Ukraine, etc., what has happened is North Americans and Central Europeans are and what I would say the Asia Pac rim, very used to working remote. Some of these offshore centers, all the people have to come into the office. And that's just been their culture. And it's not just the work culture, it's also the way, and this is where a little my telco background comes in. A lot of people take for granted in the United States, and again, in what I'll call mainstream APAC and EMEA, that telco is just like it is here in the United States with internet, that you just get it and it's the same at work as it is your house. it's completely different in a lot of these countries. For example, in India, the taxation on an organization's internet connectivity at a corporate campus is taxed completely different than it is at the consumer level. And so you just drove all these people out into the consumers, and so your internet became a variable cost, and it drastically increased. And what also people found was no one was used to working in a non-centric team environment in a lot of these offshore regions, and so the productivity levels have actually been measurably dropping over the last 6 months. And so my answer to that is, are you trying to use automation? And I don't like the buzzwords rapid process automation, superhuman automation, whatever people want to call it. At the end of the day, it's writing scripts and code to start figuring out some of these solutions to apply to these technologies that make things easier to get reports out of, to make the siloed solutions talk to each other. And that's what we really focused on with this organization during the transition was, let's get you transitioned, but let's look at opportunities. And I think one of the biggest things is in the world of cloud, it is also synonymous with digital transformation. One of the things that we're trying to do with organizations is start to talk about digital transformation in cyber. And the best place to start that is with cloud, because cloud is typically in the mind of the CIO. He understands what he or she understands what digital transformation means. And so they're prepared to have those discussions on how do we really automate and make this better, faster, and tasks that are manual and redundant, less human interactive. And that's what Cloudrise, really why this team founded it, was let's shift the paradigm, take the concepts that we learned about digital transformation projects in our past, and apply that to cyber. And why I think it's really cool with this forum and having an opportunity to chat with you today is you guys are in the cloud world. And so you have to secure that cloud world. This is a great place to start the transformation of cyber, and there's no better time. And so when we looked at the goals of this project, it was consolidate vendors, but also how do you optimize operations? How do you make this faster, more agile, with also reducing a greater amount of risk? And so, again, this was just a super exciting project to work on. So what were they replacing? On-prem DLP, it was in a network-based, it had endpoints out, it was clunky, it was hard to tune for them. The CASBs, again, was only focused on API and sanctioned applications. So they're kind of getting a world of what they thought they knew, but they couldn't see the Wild West that had developed from a cloud perspective, personal box counts which were unsanctioned, and all of the myriad of unsanctioned apps that we were actually able to light up and show them once we actually got in line with their internet traffic, and they could really start to see, wow, there is a lot of unsanctioned apps. And I think a lot of people go, yeah, I've done a shadow IT assessment over the last 5 years, Rob. That's not really cool. I would argue that the manufacturers came out in the CASB world, and they've tried the old DLP tactic back in the early days of DLP, which was, I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff, scare you, and then you're going to buy my product. That's not the way to go about shadow IT. You really need to be targeted to start to understand the user behavior, and then that starts to dictate how you tune any of these tools moving forward, whether it's a big SASE platform, the Netscopes, the Zscalers, again, the McAfees, whatever flavor you choose, they're going to have strengths and weaknesses. But at the end of the day, what I can tell you, the recurring theme that we find in this market is the technology, like we saw for 15 years with on-prem DLP, is typically completely underutilized because there's not the proper staff, requirements gathering, and actually a process for full circle management of it. And some organizations have really staffed around it, but then you hear that word staff, and it's difficult to think about, throwing bodies at problems, especially right now, when you should be thinking about how could I leverage automation? And when I talk about automation, guys and gals, it's scripts. It's nothing more than scripts, but scripts are faster to write. There's tools. What we've built is a very simple platform where we can work with a client to capture their requirements, write scripts in Python, Golang, whatever have you, deploy those scripts to the client, manage those scripts, monitor those scripts, and then evolve those scripts over time. And really what we're doing is we're automating processes in a managed fashion between these tools to get reports out faster, incidents to the SOC more quickly, information to the business more quickly, and you just do it use case by use case. And so that's what we were trying to do here is these guys wanted to take all of this tech out. And really what we were kind of sitting there going, well, when you take it out, let's put the thought in place of what do we really want to be able to automate? So on the back end of this, you can repurpose some of your staff to work on higher level risk reduction areas. So it was a big lift. There is no doubt about it. And when you're doing it all remote, and it was a new client for us, so we weren't able to establish a lot of rapport right off the bat. You had to do it inside the project. Any questions? Is this resonating with anybody sitting there going, God, our environment looks like that and we're moving that quickly? Quiet bunch. No one? All right. So data protection, it doesn't matter if it's on-prem or in the cloud. This is a human intensive. Most of the stuff around data protection is really driven by two things. One is you have an organization that just wants a cybersecurity best practice, and they want to have best of breed and best practices around threat, identity, SOC ops, and data protection. The other area I find is it's heavily driven by compliance and regulatory. A lot of people would never have DLP systems. I call data loss prevention systems self-inflicted pain because you are signing up to pay money to put a radar in place to see how your data typically is exfiltrated. It is not it very rarely captures a very motivated attacker, but what it does do is it puts a layer of certainty that one, you got an extra tripwire on the way out if a motivated attacker is trying to exfiltrate data and by some means he trips across the DLP system. The majority of the use cases are really about helping authorized users handle data better. But what you find is that is very time consuming and a lot of the reporting is manual. And so what we'll find is out of these systems, and I'm going to give you a great example here. One of the use cases was for terminated and resigned employees. So, and which is, I hate to say it, but it's a very important use case right now. They had a manual process and it took about 26 hours, right? And so what you're doing is pulling information from an HR system. So let's just say it was Workday. And they download that information from Workday and they upload it. And what they were uploading it to is 3 different detection technologies. One was their CASB, one was their secure email gateway, and the other was, I'll just use it because it's O365, because everybody seems to have O365. And the idea was to take a look, and so that's a manual download from Workday, update to 3 platforms, and then they would take the results of what people, whether it was terminated user or resigned user. Those are 2 very different behaviors for an organization. One is resignation, lead time, probably, a parting of the ways of mutual respect. A terminated employee, that could mean that things did not end well, and we probably want to get maybe into more of a blocking mode and a more aggressive posture with those platforms. Well, what they were doing is uploading that information, just looking back at both groups at what would have been uploaded to the cloud over the last 90 days or what had been emailed out. And then from there, they would download that information from those 3 platforms in spreadsheets into a SharePoint site. And then they would use Power BI to do the reporting and send it out to the business unit heads. That was 26 hours a week of manual work. And those are the opportunities that we see where there was automation, where you could put a script that said, hey, Workday, pull this information into these 3 platforms, but then bifurcate the behavior. Terminated runs against these policies for specific data and activity, where resigned employees runs against these policies, and then automatically move the information into the SharePoint database, run these predefined Power BI reports, and then let the user choose how they want to get those reports. Some people like an email report. Other people wanted to come over Teams on a real-time basis. So there's an area for automation. overcommitted and undertrained talent. So this was a prime example I'll draw back to this use case where they had this really highly educated, super sharp gal that was having to do this 26 hours a day. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, she's not going to stay here for long. You just lost a person in staffing because of mundane work. That's why Cloudrise got brought in with this organization. I see your next person being burned out on these manual tasks. Let's get the opportunity to up-level her into the work that she's doing in the cyber. And why she was so excited about working with the firm is it's cloud-based work. She was wanting to be super innovative around these cyber detection capabilities. The ineffective incident case management, what we saw there was they were going to repeat the same mistakes of on-prem data loss that they were with their new CloudSet tool, which was we're going to just take the policies off on-prem DLP and copy them up into this new CASB, SASE sort of tool and into O365 policy logic. And what we find there is this is a great opportunity to challenge the organization of why were we monitoring things in the first place? Who's getting the incident data? Is it a SOC? Is it the business unit? Is it both? And then how do we want to tune these policies and ultimately get the information bifurcated to the right people? Whether, again, it's SOC ops and a CERT, or if it's business unit leaders that are trying to figure out, hey, we're sending medical records out to this organization, or it's a billing part of the organization, and they're like, hey, there's credit card information here. At the end of the day, this was another opportunity. And the point I want to make is when you guys get into what I call cyber digital transformation, when you're moving some of these tooling to be more focused on cloud-centric applications rather than the prem, it is a phenomenal time to challenge the entire paradigm around some of this data protection programs, because what worked on-prem, chances are, was clunky, highly manual, and now you get the opportunity, like your counterparts maybe on what I call the front end of the business who have been through digital transformation. They got budget because it was revenue generating. You put in Salesforce or you put in some of these other tools. The idea is you speed order entry, you reduce inventory levels, and you're just more agile. You get cash in the door sooner. That's an easy project to pitch. I think cybersecurity professionals are really struggling with now is, cyber's a cost. It is not a revenue enhancer. And I've done 2 startups successfully. And what I can tell you as a CEO, when I put on my business hat is, when I look at our cyber costs, so the last company, we had ISO 27001 certified. Last year, we had 0 minor or major nonconformities. Super proud of that. But I also know the expense that it cost our business to maintain that in our operation centers in the UK and the United States. And so as we're starting Cloudrise, we constantly look at the weight between the cost and the risk reduction. And what we try to do is automate everything in between. And I think that those are some of the pressures that all your cyber groups are probably feeling constantly is how do you do more with less? And then that recurring manual tasks, I think a lot of people sit there and go, Rob, is this just about driving costs out of the business? Absolutely not. It is how do you make sure you can staff people that stay and are interested in their work and are actually doing relevant things for risk reduction rather than just processing information across these platforms. And that's really what we tried to do from an automation perspective. And it's kind of interesting. People get caught up in automation and they sit there and they go, well, 1, we don't have access to developers, or 2, they work in an organization that's really large and they have a development team. But when you ask the cyber team how many cycles they can actually get from developers to develop automation to help their tooling and their business processes, you kind of get this vacant look. And I've just seen it too many times where, well, we can't get the cycle of those developers. And if they do, they write a quick script, hand it to us, and then the script breaks because something changed inside our environment. And what we find is the best way to do, and it's very typical because everybody wants to take a very wide view of this, and this organization did as well, which is, well, I want to automate everything. And we had to draw them back and go, let's find 1 or 2 good use cases. With this same client yesterday, I was on the phone, and it's funny how this works. They sat there and they went, hey, you know what? We automated this script, and it worked really well. They found another auditable event that they have inside their organization. It happens quarterly, and they found, again, another young talent inside the organization that was stuck with this mundane job every quarter of running manual discovery scans for cloud. And so they had to use a SASE solution or CASB solution on-prem. They were using this old Varonis tool. And this poor person was asked to essentially do all of this manual scanning, put it all together to show access, who had access to what data where. And we took a step back with them. We said, well, that's a good use case. That's a good scope. Now let's tackle that. So what typically happens, and with this client, we kind of assessed, and then when we went into their what I'll call cyber transformation to cloud project with them, is we were doing a lot of tech enablement around that platform, that core platform they were moving to 3 to 1. But then what naturally came out is we started tuning all of the native controls that were possibly available to tune. And I think that's another really important thing to think about. Value-added resellers, these are the guys that sell you the software, and they usually maintain a bench. What you should do one day is when you buy software from a value-added reseller, go to their menu of partners and see how much tech that they sell. 20 products, 40 products, 80 products. And I'll give you my personal opinion on this. The more products they have, the inferior the quality of their enablement services. And I guarantee that in there's probably 2 or 3 manufacturers that make 80% of their revenue. Like a guy's probably a huge Palo shop or a huge Symantec shop or whatever have you. But what happens is, what I find is, we buy this new tech for cloud. So, the Zscalers, the Netscopes, the whatever have you. And then what their goal is, the manufacturer, is to be out of there as quickly as possible from an enablement perspective. And that's what this organization we worked with kind of turned around to us and said, we don't trust the manufacturer to do this deployment, because the deployment is not a deployment. This is a transformation for our organization. And I think, again, why I harp on this with you guys is, if you're in the cloud security group and you're developing these cloud tools and you're maturing them and they're becoming some of your core controls, this is an opportunity to shift the paradigm. I'm not just going to do what I did the last 20 years and buy tech from a VAR. He's going to send out his person that went through a 5-day training course to turn the knobs. What this is an opportunity to do is work with people that do transformation, challenge your business, why you're putting this technology in, and refine the scope. And then what I guarantee happens is, during that technology enablement phase, you're going to get more out of your technology investment with that manufacturer than you ever did from just what I would call a standard deployment. And then what opens up there is the use cases for process automation. And again, I keep bringing up the automation piece because what we've done with this specific client is repurpose 2 people inside their cyber organization to allow them to flourish in higher level activity. And I guarantee this journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while to make these cyber journeys happen. So how do we accomplish goals? Our goal was simple. When we came in, they asked us to do this. The low-hanging fruit was, let's consolidate vendors. So let's look at what we're doing on the prem. How can we do this better in the cloud with less manufacturers, less managed service providers? Their idea was, how do I get to a more streamlined way of managing my security with this unified platform? And they took a big hunk off. I don't know if I would have. Web proxies are always dangerous. There's just so many moving parts. Operationalize it, right, and get this deployed. We actually had to roll it out and get people on this platform. And I think one of the things that we like to do as an organization is we're super action oriented. And I think when we get to engage with organizations, one of my frustrations at the Big Four, I'll just be honest, was everything was a 70-page PowerPoint to tell you how to do it and why you should do it and why, these are all the people you're going to need to do it. But it was never in touch with reality of, there's change management. I have people, I have other groups I need to work with. And so they would sit about that from a strategy level. But when it came to action-oriented and really turning the knobs and integrating with the business, I think those are partners that you need to look for, especially again, during this kind of what I'll call cyber cloud transformation. And then we enabled focus on what their users are doing and got a view of what that data flow is. So, again, Cloudrise here, our goal when we started the company was we want to be really focused on data protection. We kind of follow the data, and then we look at the tooling available, and then we try to figure out, okay, how do you get that wrapped around risk? And we really coached this organization on a new way to approach how they were going to deal with data protection. And when you look at their data protection program with, again, the old CASB, the on-prem DLP, and the on-prem proxy, and now how they're approaching it, they completely reorged their cyber department. And they were able to repurpose people, get them more entrenched towards the business because they were reducing massive amounts of manual tasks. And frankly, it was interesting because the guy that ran the SOC and the CERT came back and said, I'm getting cleaner data out of these platforms because the policies are tuned better, they're more relevant, and I'm not having to sift through as much garbage that's funneling down into, essentially with Splunk. In their Splunk instance, he would be like, these platforms of email gateways and DLP and CASB, they're super noisy. But when we transitioned everything and cleaned up the program, cleaned up the policies based on business requirements, and did some automation to make sure that, frankly, we could do hashed exact data matching, right? So essentially taking fingerprints of data from things like Workday and Epic and these HIS systems and ERP systems, and then running it rather than regex, we were just getting much better performance out of the platform. And again, I think the transition point, this is why it's such a cool time to talk to you guys, is transition point that allowed the cyber team to do that was the budget and the initiative of the organization to piggyback on a digital transformation project. And that's where I see a lot of success with cyber organizations that want to transition, is they actually get in line with the digital transformation projects with the CIO, and then the CIO is like, oh, wait a minute, this is going to enhance things. Maybe we can actually take some of this operational budget or digital transformation budget and move it over. And that's what these guys did. That was a lot. So questions, because this tells you a little bit about us, and I don't want this to become a Cloudrise commercial, but you have to throw a gratuitous slide in at the end. So I would love to take questions from people and share any of our experiences and knowledge and what we've been doing, and then see if this was a useful 45 minutes of your time. I'll look to see if anyone's texting in questions as well, so I can figure out how to operate Zoom.
Rob, we don't have any questions in the chat right now.
Sure.
Any questions for Rob?
Super quiet group.
Must be that afternoon lull.
So, I mean, this is Chris. You mentioned different types of reports. What is the customization capabilities to get different reporting to different business units? And how did you guys do that across all the different teams and, 3 different tool sets?
Yeah, sure. So, I think everybody hears the panacea of some provider or software provides you the single lens and then single lens reporting. I haven't found it yet. Some people use their log data and Splunk, and then they dump it out to things like Looker, Tableau, Power BI. What we traditionally find, and this project was no exception, was they would pull out some, I would say, very cyber-centric reports for the SOC ops and the CERT out of Splunk. And then when it came to the CASB and then when they pre-transformation over to the SASE platform, they would independently pull information and reports ad hoc out of the 3 different platforms. So if you think about it, I look at that as switching costs. I got to log into that system, work in that system, pull the data out of that system, log into the second system, pull the data. That's a switching cost. And all that switching cost adds up in time. And what also can happen when I'm pulling information from those 3 platforms is I'm also providing the opportunity to introduce error, because typically that information's then kind of conjured together. So what we did here is when they got on a unified platform, the idea was pull that information into Snowflake, right? Or some other data store. And then they could run the reports via Tableau or Power BI. So the idea was one centralized area now where I can pull those analytics, but really where we're trying to coach all of our clients is the first thing we'll look at is what do they have available from a reporting perspective, and what is their maturity on moving data into a centralized data store of these cyber tools. And then do they actually have the staff that can run these tools like Tableau, Power BI, and Looker? And then what drives all that, though, is the audience and their requirements. And I think what we found in this case was the risk and resilience team always had been requesting information, and the compliance team, you know, this is an insurer. They have a lot of compliance. They're insurer in the medical arena. So they have multifaceted state, federal, you name it. You guys know if you lived in this world, they have a lot of regs. And so the idea was, how do you automate pulling the information out? And what we found is there was a common data store. And then you went and you took orders from the business units of what they wanted to see. You found commonalities, and then you built that into, in their case, I believe it's Power BI. They're a big Microsoft shop. So does that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
All right, we got one. Usually that can spark the flywheel. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think giving people back time on their calendars is always important. I hope this was helpful. If you guys think that there's an opportunity, we look at relationships as partnerships. We're not run by private equity or venture capital. We determine our own kind of path, and we really enjoy long-term engagements and relationships with our clients. Super excited to be out in the marketplace. And again, hopefully this was helpful, and look forward to chatting with you guys on another webinar sometime. Brent, thanks for having us today. Appreciate it.
I want to thank everyone for joining. Again, Rob and the Cloudrise team, appreciate your presentation today, and hope everyone has a great Halloween.